Happy Friday, everyone. I'm Robin, and in keeping with the theme this week about yeast, let's taste side by side two reject strawberry wines that were made using two different strains of Saccharomyces cerevisiae. I previously posted a video about the reject strawberries that I made wine with and how delicious it was. And still is. Look, I still have some. I then took that wine and the second batch of reject strawberry wine that I made and combined them to produce the first batch of reject strawberry brandy, which you can watch here. Now, I started yet another batch of reject strawberry wine, which I have right here. And I wanted to play around with the yeast. Previously, I had just used Distiller's yeast, and I wanted to see that if I switched up using wine yeast instead of Distiller's yeast, if I could get some more fun flavors that come through in the wine and then eventually into the spirit. So that's what I've got here. We're doing a side-by-side tasting. Now, earlier this week, I mentioned that different strains of Saccharomyces cerevisiae are more applicable for different applications, such as brewer's yeast is better for brewing, and wine yeast is better for wine, and distiller's yeast is better for distilling. And that's because they have different characteristics that make them better for those applications. In distilling, the goal is ethanol production, and there's not usually the goal of producing a lot of extra flavors. Now, in wine and brewing, where there's various styles, there are going to be different yeast strains that play into those styles. So these different yeasts will produce cleaner beers and wines, or they'll produce estery beers and wines. That just means these yeasts are producing other aroma and flavor compounds to various degrees and various types, in addition to producing ethanol. So yes, yeast are making more than just ethanol and CO2 during fermentation in much smaller quantities, but they're still doing it. And if you want me to go into detail on why they do this or the theories behind why they do this, let me know in the comments. So I'll be tasting the first batch of reject strawberry wine versus the third batch of reject strawberry wine. Now, both of these used reject strawberries that I got from a farmer's market. Both were about the same volume. They had 4 pounds of sugar added into both of them. They had 2 teaspoons of pectic enzyme added into both of them. They had some lemon juice added in to bring the pH down a little bit. And the big difference was that batch 1 used the Red Star dry active distiller's yeast, and batch 3 used Lalvin 71B. This would have been a much better comparison if I had one huge batch of wine that then got split into 2 and the yeast added accordingly into each one. But they were different batches, and therefore the final ABV is different. So it's not a direct comparison, but it's close enough for what I'm trying to accomplish here. So Robin, why would you choose this random wine yeast? And I found some forums, some winemaking forums, where multiple different people suggested using the Lalvin 71B. And they indicated that there would be a lot of estery flavors coming from that yeast, most specifically isoamyl esters. They didn't specify what isoamyl esters, but yeah. Probably isoamyl acetate is what I'm guessing. They said a strawberry wine using the Lalvin 71B would also be young and fruity and fresh. So sounds nice. So that's what I went with. So let's take a second to talk about isoamyl acetate, aka 3-methylbutyl ethanoate. The aromas and flavors that typically come from isoamyl acetate being in your wine, your beer, your spirit is banana. This can also come across as pear, and it is highly dependent on the actual concentration. So a really good reference for figuring out, what flavors and aromas you might get from various chemical compounds is the Good Sense Company. And so looking up isoamyl acetate at the Good Sense Company, you can see that there is a wide variety of different flavors and aromas that you can get from isoamyl acetate. Sweet, fruity, banana, ripe, estery, solventy. Those are all descriptors for isoamyl acetate. And this is entirely dependent on the concentration of the isoamyl acetate in whatever it is that you're nosing and tasting, and the other flavor and aroma compounds that are also in what you're nosing and tasting, and you as a human. You are the one who is perceiving these aromas and translating them and relating them to things that you have smelled and tasted before. So I have a little fun fact about isoamyl acetate, just as a complete sidebar. Isoamyl acetate is an active component in the sting pheromones produced by honeybees. So when you get stung by a bee and it is under stress, it releases pheromones to tell the other bees to continue to sting that person. And isoamyl acetate is one of the compounds in the pheromones. So that's neat. Now, 2 things before I taste these wines. 1, I want to give a shout out to the Patreons. Thank you guys so much for helping to support the channel and for being part of the neat community over on Patreon. And we'd love to have you, the viewer, join us over there. And if you're interested, there's a link in the description to our Patreon. 2, I am not a trained wine taster by any means. I do not drink wine often, so keep this in mind. And with that, let's taste these 2 wines. So remember, this one right here, batch number 1 was made using Distiller's yeast. Batch number 3 right here, which has a little bit of a haze to it, was made using the wine yeast Lalvin 71B. Now this still has a haze to it because I just re-racked it, so there's probably some leaves that are lingering in that wine right there. Batch 1 has been sitting in my fridge for a few months, and I did put both of these glasses in the fridge just to bring them both to the same temperature. I will note the batch 3, there might have been some blackberries that slipped into the fermentation because I put some blackberries into the fermentation. So again, this is not a direct comparison with only one variable change, but it's close enough. So not close enough for science, but close enough to answer the question of how much does the yeast impact the flavor here. So batch 1 is really, really clean, and there's some light fruitiness. I don't know that I would know right off the bat that it was strawberries if I didn't know that this was a strawberry wine, because there's a little bit of apple and a little bit of pear, maybe some citrus, but more like lemon. There's definitely notes of berries that come forward, but again, it's not screaming strawberry to me, except for the fact that I know that it's strawberries. There's a little bit of tartness here, and it's almost like a tart cherry thing. I really like it. It's very, very nice. Fruity, refreshing, really light. Actually, it almost reminds me more of blueberries, like an under-ripened blueberry that has like still that tart quality to it. And that citrus comes forward as well, that lemon. It's quite enjoyable. Let's compare that to the current batch that we have. This definitely has more of like a mustiness to it. That could be due to the fact that this hasn't clarified yet at all, and maybe the yeast are still participating in those aromas that I'm getting. There is some fruitiness. It's almost like, I don't want to say winey fruity, but like when you let grapes sit in your backpack and get squished and they start to smell like wine. Speaking from experience. There's definitely apple, some like green apple, maybe like a nectarine too. This to me is not really screaming berry. Batch 1 definitely has more berry on the nose. Yeah, it definitely has a little residual yeastiness to it. Again, it hasn't clarified out. There's a little dry quality to this. This also has a tart thing to it. It's not quite reading as tart cherries or the tart blueberries. Perhaps an underripe apricot. So a little bit like a tart apricot. There's a little bit of apple, like a sour apple. This reminds me a little bit of like the apple skin too. I don't think I would say that this has what I imagine the isoamyl esters to be that this forum was referencing. You know, I'm not getting anything that says banana or pear. There's definitely fruitiness here, less berry. So there's definitely a flavor profile difference between the two of these. I wouldn't say it's super dramatic, which I'm kind of happy about because I would be a little bit upset if using distiller's yeast was, was preventing me from getting some really delightful additional flavors. I would say that batch 1 with the distiller's yeast definitely brings forward those berry notes, whereas batch 3 using the Lalvin 71B brings forward more stone fruit flavors. I'm definitely going to let this settle out a little bit. I'll save some as wine and then the rest will go to making brandy. And that will be a fun side-by-side comparison, is the brandy coming from both of these. I will be really excited to see how this tastes as a brandy. Anyways, guys, I hope you have a great weekend and I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, give it a thumbs up, make sure to subscribe and leave me a comment below if you have taken a stab at making strawberry wine yourself.